Not much returning production for the Wake Forest Demon Deacons this season. The transfer portal class is going to have to step up in order for them to have a successful year. Biggest name returning is their running back, Demond Claiborne, and also of note on the defense, Nick Anderson back for his senior season. A just absolutely phenomenal defensive player that they're really going to look to build around on that unit. The schedule starts off pretty easy with games against Kennesaw State and FCS Western Carolina. Both of those will be wins before starting ACC play, which will be much rougher.
And that's due to the fact that NC State is just a really young team with so much returning production from last year. Granted, last season was a bit of a disappointment with the Wolfpack having some loftier expectations of competing in the ACC, maybe making a run for a conference title, but falling very, very short of that. But the season was not all lost considering freshman quarterback CJ Bailey looked very, very good throughout the season. And in year two, I think he's going to be able to take the step forward with so much returning production. It's going to be a little hard to predict NC State's entire season outlook, but against this Wake Forest team that is going to struggle a bit on offense, I do think the Wolfpack should be able to get this one on the road. Now, Wake Forest does have some decent players. Like John already said, Demond Claiborne is going to be the focal point of this offense once again. He was an 1,000-yard rusher last season, and I would assume he would get to 1,000 yards this season. But the concern is going to be the passing game. They bring in Robbie Ashford from South Carolina, who does have some starting experience, but his weapons this year at Wake Forest are not the strongest. The wide receiver room is pretty thin in terms of playing experience. The one returning wide receiver from last year is Micah Mays Jr., who was a sophomore last season and didn't have a ton of reps. So I do think this offense is going to struggle, especially with a new offensive line as well. So NC State will get the win here against Wake Forest, but this could be one we could see the Demon Deacons maybe hang in a little bit close, especially since it's earlier on in the season and because NC State is just going to be such an unpredictable team.
Out of the bye week, a pretty tricky matchup with one of our dark horses in the ACC in Georgia Tech. And I think that the Yellow Jackets are going to be a very solid team. You got Haynes King back at the quarterback position. Just all around, going to have a very solid offense. This is a team that we saw almost beat Georgia last season. I just think that Georgia Tech is going to be significantly better than Wake Forest. This Wake Forest offense going to struggle to move the ball quite a bit, even at home here. Maybe Damon Claiborne can break a run or two, but it's just not going to be enough for them to win this game. I don't think it's even going to be very close. We have Georgia Tech in this one by quite a bit. And then a road trip to Virginia Tech. And the Hokies are returning their starting quarterback from last year as well in Kyron Drones. Solid dual threat guy, not one of the best quarterbacks in college football, but he's definitely in that middle tier, a solid option. He has experience, all the things you're looking for when you're a team trying to make a bowl game like Virginia Tech is. I think that they are in a tier above Wake Forest, just a solid overall team. I like their matchup against this Wake Forest defense much better than I like Wake Forest trying to move the ball on the Hokies defense. This Virginia Tech team competed with some very solid teams last year as well. We saw them almost beat Miami. They also have one of the best home field advantages, including the Enter Sandman entrance. I just don't see a way that Wake Forest is going to be able to go on the road and win this one.
I do think that home field advantage plays a key factor in this game. Considering Virginia Tech has lost a lot of their secondary from last season, which was among the best in the country, whether it was to the transfer portal or to the NFL draft. But I think they can use the players they have coming in or that are rising through the program and develop them to be just as good as they were last year. But that home field advantage is going to be the big difference maker. The following week is another road trip, this time a much longer one, going from the East Coast to the West Coast to take on the Oregon State Beavers. And Oregon State, I think, is going to surprise some people next year. I think they have a really solid team going into the 2025 season, stemming from the fact that they have Malik Murphy coming in as their starting quarterback from Duke after a very, very solid year as a Blue Devil, as we've seen over the past few years from Blue Devil quarterbacks. And I think he's going to be the missing piece that unlocks this Beavers offense because so many of the players from last season are returning on this Oregon State team. The entire wide receiver room is essentially the same. They have their starting running back returning as well. The offensive line is basically intact as well. Defensively, it's the same story. Malik Murphy is that key to make this Oregon State team so much better. Even though it's a slim chance, I do think there is a slight path for Oregon State to make it into the playoffs as an at-large team. They would have to pull off a remarkable upset against one of their top opponents like Texas Tech or Oregon. But if they win out the rest of the season and win one of those games, we could see them in this playoffs. Against this Wake Forest team, it's a long road trip. They don't have the firepower to compete with this Oregon State offense. And defensively, there's way too much returning production for the Beavers. Everything is going the way of Oregon State. So Wake Forest will drop this game and move to 2-4 before their final bye week. And then after the bye week, they will take on a college football playoff team from last season in the SMU Mustangs. And SMU has their starting quarterback returning in Kevin Jennings after a very successful season last year, after starting the year off as the second string quarterback behind Preston Stone before becoming the starter earlier on in the season. And with him returning, SMU has a really solid chance of repeating as the regular season ACC champion. It's going to be a little bit harder this year because Clemson looks very, very good with all the returning production they have, plus the acquisitions they've made in the transfer portal. But SMU has a lot of returners as well. They might not all have been starters last season, but they were mostly with the program. So I do think that SMU has a lot of potential to be very successful again and maybe get an at-large bid. It's going to be a little bit more difficult because the schedule is pretty challenging. But against Wake Forest, even on the road, SMU is just the better team. I trust Kevin Jennings in this situation more than I trust Robbie Ashford. Once again, it's kind of the story for a lot of these games. Damon Claiborne will have his moments, but he can only do so much for this Demon Deacons offense. So the Mustangs get the win on the road, dropping Wake Forest to 2-5.
Then it's back-to-back road trips, the first of which against Florida State. Now, the Seminoles were one of the worst teams in the conference last season, as they had one of the most shocking and disappointing seasons in recent memory. They have completely revamped their team through the transfer portal, though. Thomas Castellanos, now the quarterback, transferring in from Boston College after pulling off an upset against Florida State last season as Boston College's quarterback. I think Florida State's going to have a really solid year. They've brought in some solid weapons for him as well, such as Squirrel White from Tennessee. All around, this is a very good Florida State team now. The defense is going to be very solid as well, significantly more talented all around than Wake Forest. We have Florida State defending a strong home field advantage here and dropping Wake Forest to 2-6. Then is a road trip to Virginia. Now, Virginia is also going to be an interesting team. You got Chandler Morris transferring in from North Texas, and I think he's going to lead a relatively decent Virginia offense. The defense has some starters returning, which is going to be helpful. They're not going to be one of the best teams in the ACC, not going to compete for a title or anything like that, but they're a decent team that has a chance to make a bowl game. And if you're a Virginia fan, that's really all you can ask for at this point. The program just has not been very good the past few seasons. But I do think that this season they will be a little bit better than Wake Forest. Now, I'll say that this is a game Wake Forest has one of the best chances to win in ACC play. If they're going to get an ACC win, Virginia very well could be it, but we still have the Cavaliers winning at home.
The following week is a matchup against the North Carolina Tar Heels. And the big story for the Tar Heels is their head coach is now Bill Belichick, the former New England Patriots head coach, the seven-time Super Bowl champ. And the question is, can that NFL success translate to the college football level, especially in a day and age that it is so chaotic to build a team because of the transfer portal and the recruiting process? But Belichick has done a decent job of building a solid team at Chapel Hill. And it starts with getting Gio Lopez from North Alabama. And he was very solid last season and I think is going to fit in well in this North Carolina offense. They do have a couple other good playmakers, but they've lost quite a bit on the defensive side of the ball, particularly on the defensive line with Bo Atkinson, now an Ohio State Buckeye, and he was going to be the key piece for this pass rush. And with him gone, North Carolina might not be as good as some people are predicting them to be in Belichick's first season, but I do think they are still going to be better than Wake Forest here. I would consider this another game that they might have a better chance in compared to the rest of the schedule because it is a home game and North Carolina does have so many questions going into this season. If it all falls apart for the Tar Heels, maybe Wake Forest can pull off a bit of an upset win here. But I do think that the experience of Gio Lopez is going to be the deciding factor, even on the road. So the Tar Heels will get the win here, dropping Wake Forest to 2-8. But Demon Deacons fans can rejoice because they will get into the win column in the second to last week of the season against the Delaware Blue Hens, their first season playing at the FBS level, and they will struggle pretty heavily in their first year. They have a pretty difficult schedule with a roster that I don't think is ready to compete at such a elite level against even a weaker Power 4 team. So Wake Forest will get their third win of the year before finishing the year off with a tough road trip to face Duke.
And one of the reasons that's going to be such a tough game is the history of Duke these past few seasons. The Blue Devils have been consistently outperforming expectations, and a lot of that has been due to quarterback play. They have not had the same starting quarterback back to back years in any of those seasons either. The first time it was with Riley Leonard, who transferred to Notre Dame. Last season, it was with Malik Murphy, who is now an Oregon State Beaver. This season, they're going to try and pull it off for a third straight time with transfer quarterback Darian Mensah out of Tulane, and they did pay him $4 million to come there for 2 seasons. So Duke could be even scarier in 2026 potentially. But for right now, all we care about is 2025. They're going to have a great offense with Darian Mensah at the helm. I think this is going to be a very solid team, kind of similar to Georgia Tech. They are one of our dark horses in the ACC. Their home field advantage is certainly going to help them in this game as well. And we have them getting this win over Wake Forest to close out the season. Now, our way too early projection for the Demon Deacons was 4.55 wins, and we had them going 4-8, getting an ACC win. We have since revoked that ACC win, and the projection dipped slightly to 4.6 wins, 1.45, and 6.55 in ACC play. Now, the good news for Wake Forest fans is that 3-9 is going to be the floor. This is the absolute worst it could possibly go. The bad news, I don't really see them making a bowl game this season. We have the ceiling at 5-7, pulling off only 2 ACC wins. It's just not looking super great. Not many of these games, I think, can go the other way. There's a few that Wake Forest could potentially win, but not enough that they could make it to a bowl game this season. So, thank you guys for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in our next video.